Here comes the money.
Here we go. Money talk.
Here comes the money.
Professor, what's going on, my friend?
Well, not much. How are you?
It's good seeing your face. It's been too long, my man.
Yeah. It's always fun to connect, right?
Absolutely. I'm super excited to have you on today, so I really appreciate you taking the time. I can't wait to kind of showcase to our listeners how you've been able to leverage your background in statistics to become a very profitable sports bettor and in the process make, hundreds of your subscribers profitable as well. So let's dive right into your background and really how you do leverage statistics on a daily basis to determine what plays you're making in a given day.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I guess I would just start off by saying, like a lot of people, I've heard a lot of people say you have to lose a lot before you win with sports betting. And my story was no different with that. And I found that for me, I kind of always had the math background. I did undergrad in math, master's and PhD in statistics. And so I had the math background. But when I started getting into betting, I did it like most people, which is just, this seems like a good play. And, I don't know, maybe there's some people out there who can do that, right? But I couldn't, and I was terrible at it until I finally, and it's actually just kind of, the whole long story is crazy, just the happenstance of how it came together, but I got talked into if I could build models to do this, and I was kind of hesitant and finally just decided to do it. And you build something and you kind of look at it and you kind of track it around, you make improvements, and finally I was like, okay, I actually have a system here where I can identify what prices are good. And so that's been the key that I always preach to people, is identifying good prices. And you always think about that. The first thought is point spreads, obviously. You think about that. But with moneyline sports, which I think I have a huge edge at because I have a probability and statistics background. And so identifying money line prices that are good, you save 10 cents here, 15 cents there, and over the course of a full year, that really adds up. And that's taken me from a bettor who was just feeling like I constantly had to reload to one where now I'm constantly pulling money out. It's just completely shifted the world for me. And that's why I always preach, just looking at probabilities and whether that's my model or someone else's, that mindset of finding good prices to me is my big spiel and what's helped me.
Absolutely. For folks that may not necessarily be familiar with models or how they function, what would be your basic introductory lesson on what a model is and how you build something like that?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. Really taking a bunch of data and trying to use that data to come up with some prediction. And the prediction can be anything by how much a team's going to win by, how many points are going to be scored in a game, or converting to probability. Probability gets a little bit trickier. You can get really deep into the woods or into the weeds with logistic modeling and all sorts of different ELO modeling. I mean, there's all sorts of different ways you can get into the weeds there. But we're just trying to use the data to come up with some anchoring point, really, of a prediction, and then we can use that and react off of that. And some people, you can treat that anchoring point, that prediction, you can use your own knowledge. You don't have to be married to it. You can kind of say, yeah, but this, and I'm going to shift it a little bit or whatever, but it just kind of gives you a starting point, because I found it so hard, especially in a moneyline sport. Like, let's take a hockey game. How do you know if the price should be minus 140, minus 150, minus 160. I mean, it's really hard to figure that out. And so the model just takes the data and tries to output a point to kind of start out and say, hey, this is kind of where you should be eyeing the price, where it should be, and see if you disagree with the sports books, because that's where you're going to make money. When you agree with the sports books, that's when you pass. But when you disagree, you say, hey, I think there's an edge here. And I will have to just add to this. And, I sometimes get pushback and people will say, well, there's no way you can outsmart the sports books or something. And I know they have a lot of smart people working for them, but what people have to remember is they have different incentives than we do. I have the incentive of trying to come up with the most accurate prediction possible. They have the incentive of trying to figure out how to manage their money, manage what's going to happen. They know that if they price something at a certain point, what people with millions of dollars are going to do coming in betting on it. So they have to worry about that stuff. I don't have to worry about that. I can just say, hey, this is mispriced, and we can go bet it. But the model, that prediction, is what tells us an anchoring point of if we think it's mispriced or not.
Yeah. And so in super simple terms, like, you plug in a bunch of inputs, whether it be batting average or ERA or strikeout percentage, whatever it may be. You pick and choose kind of which data you want to include, and it spits out a prediction for the final score of the game, or not necessarily the final score of the game, but the percentage likelihood of a team winning. And if you see the sports books listing that price at like essentially a 50-50 chance of this team or the other team winning, but your model has it leaning in one direction or the other and a wide variety, that's a spot that you may go in on.
Yeah, absolutely. The inputs to the model over time, over the years that I've done this, have gotten more complicated. And there's a lot of people ask me, how do I build my own model? And half of the battle is knowing what inputs to use and what not to use, what's noise and what's signal, what's real and what's just random variation. I always talk about random variance a lot. And so that's, the hard part. But the output kind of, anchors us to a point, and then we can see if that differs from the sports book. And people will sometimes be surprised, but in baseball, we're often just looking for 2, 3, 4 percentage points different. And there's a lot of, it's free and simple calculators out there where you can convert money line prices to probabilities. And then you can take the probability that the model says. And if it's 2, 3 percentage points difference, that's a pretty good edge. In the long run, we're gonna be able to make some good money off of that. And so people always, get a little bit at first. I think a little bit surprised. I'll give something an A grade, and I'll say the probability that this team wins is 45%, and they'll say, well, that's they're more likely to lose than win. I'll say, yeah, 45%, but we're playing this at plus 150, and the break-even point at plus 150 is 40%. So if I can make this bet, 20 times, I'm going to win it 9. And the 9 times that I win at plus 150 and the 11 times I lose, I'm going to make a pretty decent amount of money off of that.
That's super interesting, and broken down into a very simple way, which even I can digest. You mentioned earlier that it's super hard to tell what inputs are worth including and what aren't. And you watch a movie like Moneyball, and they're talking about weighted on base and WCR plus and a bunch of stuff that nobody's any idea what it means. How have you been able to determine what's worth going into the model or what isn't?
That's a great question, and it's funny you bring up Moneyball. That was one of the, like a lot of people, probably one of the first baseball analytic books that I read. It was either the first or the second that really got me thinking about this type of stuff. I was in high school when that book came out, and reading that and getting the brain thinking through just a different way than what we had thought for so many years. But to answer the question, how do you know what to put in there? There's a difference between a statistic that tells you what happened and something that's going to give you an idea of what will happen. And sometimes people confuse those two things. ERA is a great example. I always say on my show, ERA tells you a great job of what did happen, but it's not the best predictor of what will happen. There are better metrics to do that. How do you do that? You take a bunch of data from years past, you remove some of the data, and then you kind of run its own model and just see which one is predictive of itself. And you see a stat like ERA is real bouncy over time. And what that means is it's not really a predictive measure because it just bounces up and down. There's a lot of things that go into ERA that are outside of a pitcher's control. And so we try to find the statistics that are much more predictive, i.e. they are, when you remove them from the data, they are good predictors of themselves, which means they're more stable over time. And that kind of illustrates more what's in the pitcher's control versus what's the random variation. That gets into the batting average of balls in play and some of that stuff, which, is becoming a little bit more mainstream. But yeah, it's a lot of work to try to figure out what should be used and what shouldn't be used. And, the other answer to the question is, I'm a pretty smart guy, but one of my strengths is I try to learn from everybody I can. I follow a lot of smart people on Twitter. I read a lot of books. I listen to a lot of smart people, a lot of talks. They do a lot of work, and then I just try to learn from it. And how can I use that, right? I don't have to invent everything myself. And if they can figure some things out, find smart people, trust the smart people, and learn from them, saves me a lot of time. And so a lot of what I've learned has come from the pioneers ahead of me. The Dan Zaborskis, those guys, the Bill James, these guys who, kind of pioneered and learned a lot. I pick up stuff from them, and then that kind of starts me, 80% of the way there, where then I only have to kind of run to the finish line because they've already figured out a bunch of stuff that I don't have to mess with trying to figure out myself.
Something that you mentioned earlier was that you seem to find the most value in moneyline sports. Do you mind expanding on what you mean by that?
Yeah, no, it's a great a great thing to dive into. I found with college basketball, for example, this last year, and I found it the last several years, that early on in the season, if you have a model that's worth anything, you can kind of profit doing whatever you want, because the models just do a great job of figuring out all the information early on that the books can't adjust to. But as the season goes along and the books start adjusting, point spread sports become really difficult to profit off of, because when the error is, 3, 4, 5 points in, say, a basketball game, there's enough of a wiggle room there that you can capitalize on that. But when the books are only missing by a point or two, it's really hard to figure that out, how to actually capitalize, because your variance is so large, it just misses. And so all that to say that point spread sports can sometimes be very difficult to profit off of when the books get really accurate, which happens. Obviously, in the NFL, we always hear about how accurate those point spreads are. It's the toughest sport to profit off of. But like I said, I noticed it the last 3 seasons in college basketball that the books were getting so good by the end of the season with regards to their point spreads that it just became really hard. Not impossible, but harder every year. They got better and better, and it just went from the start of the season was just easy making money to the end was really a grind trying to figure out where to go. Where I found the value with money line sports, honestly, is real simple, and it breaks down like this. People don't understand probability. And so if you have a model that understands probability, that's all moneyline is. It's probability. Who wins, who loses. What's the probability you win, right? Versus a point spread sport, you're trying to find an expected margin of victory. People think about that easier. Their brains understand it, but human beings are not meant to understand probability. And so the probabilities in the money lines are often really far off, and it's just easier for people like me to capitalize on because I know how to handle probability, whereas 99% of the world does not. And I'll explain it like this, because people sometimes doubt me when I say that. But if you think about human evolution, for thousands and thousands of years, we lived in a society where probability was basically you did something good and you lived, you did something bad and you died, right? That's how it was, right? Yeah. You go pet the big pretty kitty and you die, and you look at your friend who did that and you're like, okay, and you learn cause and effect. You learn, don't pet the big pretty kitty because the big pretty kitty's going to eat me, right? Don't eat these berries, I'm going to die, right? That's how the world was for so long, up until the last couple hundred years, right? And so our brains are just so trained to cause and effect that probability is this really difficult concept. And so by attacking these money line markets that are just all probability based, I find that we can find bigger edges, and those bigger edges are what leads to easier profitability and more consistent profitability, which is more fun than being on the roller coaster of ups and downs, up and downs. You can just kind of consistently make money in these money line markets if you can find the edges via probability.
Yeah. Consistently making money sounds pretty good to me. I don't know about you.
It is. Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot more fun. It's a lot more fun than the roller coaster of like a great week and then a terrible week and a great week and a terrible week. And I just found that the more I focus on moneyline sports, the more I go from for a while, I was always in the not every month is going to be profitable, right? We're going to have some losing months. And now it's more shifting. The more I focus on moneyline sports, it becomes more not every week is going to be profitable. Yeah. And I like narrowing that down where it's like, we're going to have some losses for sure, but it's much more fun when the loss is kind of more minimized to weeks rather than a full month, because it's just a little bit easier to sleep at night,
Absolutely. And what sport have you found yourself most profitable in? Is there one in particular that really stands out?
College basketball and MLB both. MLB has just been fantastic. Last year was fantastic. This year was fantastic. It's just consistently, when we find our big edges, it's just week in and week out. It seems great. And then college basketball shifted to money lines towards the end of last season, and it was like every week was just massive profits. And so those are really the two sports that I've done really well with. I'm in the process of adding on and building up models for more sports, and so hopefully I'll dabble into more areas going forward. But right now I've really only dove into 3 sports. The other one's college football, which is so much fun to talk about. But college football is like the NFL, is a sport that we all love to bet on, but it's more of a like, can we have fun and make a little bit of money? Not like that's where we're gonna like make our actual make our eating money, that sort of thing, right? Yeah. Where we're going to make our real money in college basketball and MLB. And college football, I always feel like is more of a, hey, if we can make some play money with this, that's great. But football is so tough to bet on because there's just so much attention paid to it. The lines are just so good.
there's so much variance, there's so much parity. It's like that's just as hard to nail down as anything when you talk about probability and the percentage of a potential outcome. So,
Yep.
I'm curious where you see the future of betting going. I see more and more cappers that are utilizing Dub Club that are model-based bettors. And I remember when we first started Dub Club, it was not necessarily like that. People may have had them, but they definitely weren't publicizing them. And now it seems like it's just right and left, everybody relying on a model.
Yeah, I think you have to some extent. It's almost like with baseball. I think the sports betting industry was both ahead and behind baseball. Baseball is a great example that we can all talk about. We all understand because, like you said, Moneyball has been such a big thing. I think there were a lot of professional bettors, a lot of big-time things that were kind of siloed off that were using models a long time ago. But, they were kind of ahead of the trend. But I think now that it's becoming much more mainstream, I think almost everybody that's going to be successful is going to have to rely somewhat on a model. Just like with baseball, it's not that there's this misconception with baseball that there's like analytic teams and not analytic teams. And that's nonsense. Every team has statisticians, analytics, models. Some have more than others. And no team is exclusively using models, and no bettor is using exclusively nothing but models. Like there's other things happening too, and there's just a spectrum. Some people are going to be a little bit more reliant on it or not, but the prices I think over time have gotten better. And I've tracked some of this a little bit, but you can kind of see it with regards to just line movements, right? 10 years ago, 20 years ago, the opening lines for most sports were relatively terrible for a lot of games. And there were a lot of people who could know, who didn't need fancy models, and they could bet that. The sportsbooks would adjust, and there would be this large difference between the opening line and the closing line. That's where this concept of closing line value that you hear so much about really became popular, because the line moved so much because the opening lines were so bad. Well, now we're in an era where the lines are so much better. They start better and they end better. And so when your margins are so much smaller, if you're not having some form of a model and analytic help, it makes it hard really to figure out where the edges are and where you should attack, because the margins are just so thin compared to where they were, say a decade ago. And like I said, you see that with the opening lines. There's so many cases where the opening line's actually better than the closing line.
Yeah.
And you would never have seen that 10 years ago. That was not a thing, because the sportsbooks didn't have people to do this stuff either. Now the sportsbook have hired people like me. Every once in a while you'll see these openings that sportsbooks will have for statisticians and data scientists and things like that. They've got people, and they start off with good lines, and that doesn't mean you can't beat them, but you just need a little bit more help. And that's where the model, the analytics, whether you're using it as a 25% tool, a 50% tool, or a 75% tool, it's almost got to be part of your arsenal now if you're doing this, like I am, day in and day out with real money.
I got one last question for you before I let you get back to building out that college football model. But somebody kind of new to the industry who may not have a PhD like you do, what would your suggestion for them be to maybe put together their first model? Where would they go? How would they get their start?
Don't. my real answer, yeah, subscribe to me. Or someone else. My real answer is, and I've been asked this question a few times, my real answer is find someone smart and trust them, because the amount of work that I have put in to my models is tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of hours, along with the tens of thousands of hours of training that I have. It's really difficult. I think that if you don't have a lot of good training, a lot of experience with this, I think you're going to spend hundreds of hours going down wrong trails and finding stuff that doesn't work for most people, for nine out of 10 people. So my recommendation is find someone you trust, track out how they're doing, whether it's me or someone else, and just kind of hop on board their analytics. Start with looking at the analytics that are freely available for baseball. Fangraphs. 538 had some stuff for a while, but with their data, with their layoffs at ABC, they don't have as much now. The Pro Football Prospectus stuff. There's depending on your sport, there's people out there and either for free or for very little cost that make these models, and just start tracking it and see how they do. Because building it yourself, the years of education that I have. I spent 5 years in industry as well, working at a company, and all of that training. And then the time it, got me started on the right foot and knew what to look out for and what rabbit holes not to chase. But then even then, I've spent, like I said, so many hours doing my own stuff and tweaking and learning what doesn't work and testing stuff. And it's just so much time. It's just I don't think it's ROI positive for most people to build it themselves. If you have the skill set and you have the training, but otherwise, I think just find a person or persons that you trust, that you like, that are being real with you, that are transparent, and just kind of use their stuff as your analytical tool in your toolkit.
I'll tell you one thing: I'd much rather pay you a couple shekels to get the outputs than and know that I'm going to get that money back over the course of the long run than go down the rabbit hole of building it myself. But
and that's one of the things too that I've tried to do, and I try to continue to add is because it's interesting going from just a better myself to helping other people make bets has been such an interesting process, because when I'm making my own bets, I'm just thinking about the ways I like to do things and what information I want. And then I started this YouTube show and got people, from there, and it just kind of kept growing and growing. And at some point, the challenge of, well, what do other people want to know as well, became a new challenge for me. And that's what I've tried to do, is put together, especially like for baseball right now, I provide for my subscribers the day before the games and the day of the games what I call a cheat sheet, which has a ton of information, projections, probabilities, weather information, the percent change that the stadium has on the game, and just all that information. And that's a type of stuff that I'm just trying to make sure I get people all the great information that they need to make whatever bets they want. If they just want to kind of tail what I do, or if they want to take the information and do their own thing, I'm trying to cater a product to, the novice sports bettor, the intermediate sports bettor, and the advanced sports bettor, to give them all the information that I've done, that I've built. And that's kind of my goal going forward too, is continue to build out more models, build out more information, and continue just getting that information to people in digestible ways where they can say, this is what I want, this is what I don't want, but it's something for everybody that can help them be a more informed sports bettor.
everybody, you heard it from him. Go check him out. He's clearly shown his intelligence over the last 23 minutes, and I can promise you it's worth every penny. Professor, thank you so much for coming on. It's been truly a pleasure, and we got to get you on another episode come college football season. We can break down the variables that are going into that model and figure out if it's worth your time and worth our time tailing. But knowing you, I imagine it will.
Absolutely.
Be, so thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Dollar, 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 dollar.